You think you know cold? You think you know what it means to march through winter? But in 1812, 600,000 men learned what cold really means when they followed Napoleon Bonaparte into the Russian winter. This isn't about strategy or politics. This is about what happens when human bodies meet 30 degrees below zero, when your spit freezes before it hits the ground, when horses die standing up, frozen solid overnight, when entire battalions vanish into white nothing, leaving only scattered buttons and belt buckles in the spring thaw. The Grande Armée wasn't just any army. These were veterans who'd conquered Europe, men who'd marched from Spain to Austria, who'd seen Moscow's golden domes in September when the leaves were still green. But winter doesn't care about your victories. Winter doesn't read your battle honors. If you value documented military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual. Using sources from Philippe Paul de Segur's eyewitness account and the Russian State Military Archives. Now back to the story. June 24th, 1812, Napoleon crosses the Niemen River with the largest army Europe has ever seen. 614,000 men from 20 different nations. French, German, Polish, Italian, Dutch. They carry summer uniforms and 60 days of rations. The plan is simple. Defeat the Russians before winter. Be home by Christmas. But Alexander isn't playing Napoleon's game. The Tsar pulls back, burns everything. Scorched earth from the border to Moscow's gates. No food, no shelter, no quick victory. September 14th, Borodino, the bloodiest single day in the Napoleonic Wars. 70,000 casualties in 12 hours. Napoleon wins, technically, but he loses 28,000 irreplaceable veterans. Men who knew how to march, how to forage, how to survive. The ones you need when things go wrong. Moscow burns. 5 days of flames that melt church bells and turn stone walls to powder. No supplies, no surrender. Just empty streets and ash. October 19th, Napoleon finally admits defeat. Time to go home, but winter is already coming. The thermometer at the French embassy reads -2 degrees Celsius. In October, November 6th, Dorogobush, the first real taste of what's coming. -15 Celsius. Jean-Baptiste de Marbeau watches soldiers' breath turn to ice crystals that tinkle when they fall. Horses start dying in the traces, not from exhaustion, from cold. The Grande Armée begins to dissolve, not from battle, from temperature. November 9th, Smolensk. -22 Celsius. General Caulaincourt records exact numbers in his diary. 800 men from the 4th Corps freeze to death in their sleep. They go to bed soldiers. They wake up corpses. The lucky ones don't wake up at all. Food runs out, then firewood, then hope. Soldiers burn their own muskets for warmth, melt snow with their body heat because fires won't light in the wind, eat leather from their boots, their belts, their horse tack, anything that might have calories. November 26th through 28th, the Berezina River crossing. This is where numbers become nightmares. 2 makeshift bridges over black water, -27 Celsius. General Eble, engineers work waist deep in the river, building spans with their bare hands. Most die within hours from hypothermia, but they finish the job. 30,000 men make it across, 20,000 don't. They fall through thin ice, get trampled in the panic, or simply lie down in the snow and never get up. Victor Dupuy writes in his journal, "The river took more men than Austerlitz cost us." December 3rd, Vilna. The temperature hits -37 Celsius. Sebastian Joseph de Caraman watches entire companies vanish overnight. Not desertion, death. Men sit down to rest and freeze solid in minutes. Their uniforms become their shrouds. The cold changes everything. Your saliva freezes. Your eyelashes stick together. Touch metal with bare skin and leave pieces behind. Breathe too deeply and your lungs burn like you've swallowed fire. Fall down and you're dead. Not eventually, immediately. Discipline collapses. Units fragment into desperate gangs fighting over scraps of food, pieces of firewood, anything that burns. Officers abandon their men. Men abandon their weapons. Everyone abandons everything except the simple math of survival. Calories in, heat out. Stay moving or die. December 6th. Smorgoni. Napoleon abandons his army, gets in a sleigh and races for Paris, leaving 500,000 men to find their own way home. Or die trying. Most die trying. December 14th. Kovno, the last major crossing into friendly territory. General Hogendorp counts the survivors. Fewer than 20,000 combat-effective soldiers remain from the 600,000 who crossed the Niemen in June, a 96% casualty rate, the worst military disaster in European history. But the numbers don't tell the whole story. The survivors do. Captain Franz Roeder writes about finding entire French battalions frozen in formation, still holding their muskets, still standing in ranks. Perfect discipline, perfect death. The cold preserved them so well that spring travelers could read their unit badges, count their buttons, see the expressions on their faces. Sergeant Adrien Bourgogne describes sleeping in piles of corpses for warmth. Dead bodies hold heat longer than living ones, he learned. The dead were more useful than the living in that math. Dr. Dominique Jean Larrey, Napoleon's chief surgeon, performs amputations on frostbitten limbs without anesthesia because the cold has already numbed everything. He works barehanded in -30 weather because gloves make him clumsy. His fingers turn black, but he keeps cutting. The cold strips away everything civilized, everything human, reduces grown men to animals fighting over frozen horse meat, over rags, over corners of ruined buildings where the wind doesn't cut quite so deep. General Philippe Paul de Ségur watches French cavalry officers, men who charged at Wagram and Austerlitz, reduced to crawling on hands and knees, begging Russian peasants for crusts of bread, for handfuls of straw, for anything to delay the cold for 1 more hour. This script is researched and factual, using sources from military archives and first-hand accounts. If you value documented military history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. The Grande Armée doesn't retreat. It dissolves, man by man, unit by unit, day by day. Each degree drop in temperature costs thousands of lives. Each blizzard erases entire regiments. The cold doesn't just kill soldiers, it erases them. Come spring, entire battalions exist only as scattered bones and buttons in the snow. Some try to fight the cold with engineering, build shelters from corpses and broken wagons, dig snow caves, create human chains to share body heat. Nothing works. The cold is patient. The cold is thorough. The cold wins every time. Others try to outrun winter. Force marches through the night, push deeper into friendly territory before the next storm hits. But exhausted men move slowly, slowly enough for the cold to catch them. Always. The irony burns deeper than the frost. These men conquered Europe by moving fast, striking hard, overwhelming enemies with speed and violence. But you can't outfight weather. You can't intimidate temperature. The cold doesn't care about your tactical genius or your veteran status. December 20th, Königsberg. The survivors stagger into Prussian territory, barely human, uniforms in rags, feet wrapped in bloody cloth, eyes empty of everything except the simple desire to keep breathing. Russian officers who see them write reports describing walking skeletons and ghosts in uniform. But even reaching Prussia doesn't mean safety. The cold followed them. Men who survived Borodino, who lived through the Berezina, who walked 1,000 miles through hell, die in warm beds from infections, from malnutrition, from organs that simply stop working after months of abuse. The strategic implications ripple across Europe. Napoleon's reputation for invincibility dies in the Russian snow. The continental system collapses. Coalition armies form. Within 2 years, foreign troops march down the Champs-Élysées, but the human cost cuts deeper. Entire villages in France and Germany lose every man of military age. Polish regiments that joined Napoleon dreaming of independence never see Poland again. Italian units that marched singing into Russia leave only silence behind. The cold doesn't discriminate. Generals die beside privates. Veterans freeze next to recruits. French, German, Italian, Polish. The snow buries them all the same. No rank, no nationality, no favoritism. Just bodies and cold and the mathematics of survival that nobody could solve. Colonel Louis-Joseph Vianney records the daily death toll in his journal. November 15th, 83 men. November 16th, 112. November 17th, 147. By December, he stops counting individuals, starts counting by companies, then by battalions. The horses die first, then the camp followers, then the wounded who can't keep up. The strong cannibalize equipment from the weak. Buttons become currency. Bootlaces buy bread. A working musket trades for a day's rations. Captain Jean Roch-Coignet describes finding a Russian village where the entire Württemberg regiment had taken shelter, all dead, frozen in their sleep around a fireplace that burned out 3 days earlier, their faces peaceful, their bodies blue-white like porcelain. The cold had killed them so gently they never woke up. Marshal Michel Ney earns his reputation as the bravest of the brave, not from charging enemy lines, but from walking the rear guard every single day, rallying stragglers, carrying wounded men on his own back, refusing to abandon anyone who could still breathe. He loses 40 pounds in 6 weeks. His hair turns completely white. The equipment failures tell their own story. Musket locks freeze solid. Cannons crack when fired in extreme cold. Wagon wheels shatter like glass. Even the Imperial Guard's bearskin hats become death traps. The fur collects ice that never melts, adding 10 pounds of frozen weight to every soldier's head. November 30th, Parthenay. Temperature drops to minus 39 Celsius. The coldest night of the retreat so far. General Armand de Caulaincourt finds entire gun crews frozen to their artillery pieces, hands welded to metal by ice, faces pressed against iron gun barrels. The battery commander sits upright in his saddle, reins still in his hands, his horse dead beneath him for 12 hours. December 1st brings something worse than cold. Wind. Siberian gusts that cut through wool like it's paper. The wind chill drives effective temperature down to minus 50 Celsius. Men die simply from breathing too hard. The air is so cold it burns lung tissue, causes internal bleeding, kills from the inside out. Dr. Heinrich von Roos, a Württemberg physician, conducts crude field autopsies on frozen corpses. He discovers that extreme cold kills in stages. First, the extremities shut down. Fingers and toes go numb, then black, then simply snap off like icicles. Then the blood retreats from arms and legs to protect vital organs. Finally, the heart stops, not from damage, but from lack of warm blood to pump. The retreat becomes a laboratory of human endurance. How long can a man march without food? Answer, 11 days before collapse. How cold before frostbite becomes amputation? Answer, minus 25 Celsius with wet feet. How many calories does a human body burn just staying warm in Russian winter? Answer, 4,000 per day. Triple the normal rate. Food becomes obsession. Men fight duels over crusts of moldy bread. Officers trade family jewels for handfuls of grain. The Imperial Guard, Napoleon's elite, reduced to boiling leather straps and eating the paste. Captain Pierre Domenil watches his grenadiers cook and eat their own belts, their cartridge boxes, anything made from animal hide. December 5th, Osmiani. The temperature hits minus 42 Celsius. General Claude Etienne Guillot records the death of the old guard, not in battle. From cold, 3,000 veterans who'd marched with Napoleon since Italy, since Egypt, since Austerlitz, gone in a single night. They lay down in formation and never got up. Perfect ranks of frozen corpses. Cannibalism starts December 7th, not spoken about, not officially recorded. But the survivors' letters tell the truth. Francois Bourgogne writes to his sister about finding butchered remains that weren't horse or cattle. Adrien Jean-Baptiste Francois Bourgogne describes meat markets in abandoned villages where the merchandise walked on two legs. The Imperial Guard's drummers keep marching cadence until their drumsticks freeze to their hands. The regimental eagles, symbols of French glory, become anchors of ice that men can't carry. Unit standards abandoned in snowdrifts, colors left behind like breadcrumbs marking the path of defeat. December 9th, Molodechno. Napoleon's final dispatch to Paris before abandoning his army. The health of His Majesty has never been better. Meanwhile, his soldiers die at a rate of 3,000 per day. The gap between official reports and battlefield reality becomes a chasm wide enough to bury an empire. The Cossacks learn to follow the smell. Frozen corpses don't decay, but they develop a distinctive odor that carries for miles in cold air. Russian cavalry tracks the Grand Army, not by footprints or intelligence reports, but by the scent of death on the wind. Individual stories become statistical nightmares. The 24th Light Infantry begins the campaign with 2,100 men. Reaches the Berezina with 400, crosses into Prussia with 63. The 33rd Line Regiment starts with 3,000 soldiers. 12 survive, 12 out of 3,000. Captain Charles Francois watches the 3rd Corps disintegrate battalion by battalion. November 20th, 7,000 effectives. November 30th, 2,800. December 10th, 412. December 20th, 89. By New Year's Day, Muiris. The 3rd Corps exists only on paper and in mass graves scattered across 600 miles of Russian wilderness. The medical catastrophe compounds the military disaster. Army surgeons report frostbite cases that require immediate amputation but have no tools, no anesthetics, no clean conditions for surgery. Men choose to die with their limbs intact rather than survive as cripples. Field hospitals become morgues where the wounded go to die more comfortably. Spring 1813 brings the reckoning. Russian peasants find mass graves containing thousands of corpses, perfectly preserved by the cold, still wearing their uniforms, still carrying their equipment, still holding their weapons. The ice gave up its dead in perfect condition, like a museum of military disaster. Medical officers studying the corpses make discoveries that change military doctrine forever. Frostbite patterns, malnutrition stages, hypothermia symptoms. The Russian campaign becomes a textbook on how cold kills armies, how winter wages war better than any human general. Some lessons stick, Never again does any European army attempt major winter operations without proper clothing, adequate supply lines, and realistic expectations about what human bodies can endure. The Grande Armée's death teaches the world how to survive cold. But the deeper lesson hits harder. There are forces bigger than human ambition. Weather doesn't negotiate, temperature doesn't surrender. Nature doesn't recognize empires or crowns or tactical genius. The cold that killed Napoleon's army had been waiting in Russia for centuries, patient and ready for someone arrogant enough to test it. The final accounting comes from Russian archives opened in 1991. Burial records from Orthodox churches along the retreat route. Parish registers documenting mass graves. The numbers are precise. Between Moscow and the Niemen River, the Grande Armée left behind 437,812 bodies, counted, recorded, filed away in neat Cyrillic script. But even that number tells only part of the story, because in 1814, when Allied armies occupied Paris, French engineers digging defensive positions around Montmartre uncovered something that reframed everything. A mass grave containing over 3,000 skeletons, still wearing the remnants of Grande Armée uniforms. Men who made it home from Russia only to die from infections and organ failure months later. The cold had followed them across Europe and finished the job in their own backyard. Winter doesn't just kill you in winter, it marks you, claims you, collects its debt when you think you're safe.